Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Glad to see you again and have another intimate, deep yet educational conversation with you. Folks, as we all know, to understand a person, it helps to know a little bit about their family. Just as to understand a country, it helps to be familiar with its history. In our case, to understand humans, it helps to understand their evolution. The idea of evolution is that there are small random changes that happen to an animal, and these changes then affect its chances of survival. The resulting increase of numbers of the ones who survive better is called natural selection. A famous example is the type of butterfly that is white, but sometimes randomly born black. In the wild, the black butterflies don't do so well because they are easier to see and therefore easier for predators to find and eat. It follows that there are then fewer of them around to make little baby butterflies, so the white ones tend to dominate. But things change. Once upon a time in an English industrial town, the buildings became blacker due to the soot from the new factories. This provided new camouflage for the black butterflies, so they took prevalence. And it helps to look at history of evolution to know how animals have responded to threat, because this is also how humans respond to threat. And very few things are more important to our evolutionary development and natural selection than how we respond to threat. Our behavior is to the most part influenced by things that we perceive as threats, no matter if they are actual threats or they just remind to us of a dangerous situation we've lived previously. Our modern nervous systems are dated back to fossils from over 500 million years ago, and the first sign of sophistication in the system comes in none less than a jawless fish. These fish don't really do anything to defend themselves from predators except keep swimming around. The shark's primary goal is to find prey and eat it. For that purpose, it has developed, not by design, but by accident and natural selection, really good eyes for seeing things that move. But then, one day, one of those jawless fishes, for some random reason, instead of just carrying on as usual, it did nothing. Literally nothing. It just freezed. This was a revolution. Shark continues to track and follow movement. Now, through an act of random genetic transformation, the one jawless fish's response to this danger is to stay still. So the shark doesn't see it and passes on by. The fish survives. So by keep doing so, this type of fish will have many more descendants than its non-freezing cousins. This will go on for few generations, and slowly we begin to see a change in the population. More and more fish are freezing when attacked. They are changing as a species and surviving better as a result. This is the adaptation necessary to survive threat through natural selection. Now let's see it from the shark's perspective. The shark notices that there are fewer and fewer fish to eat. Sharks start to starve and die. Their population is in trouble. So then, another random thing happens. One shark develops the capacity to see the fish that freeze when shark pass by. For this shark, the ocean is a glorious buffet of helpless, stationary fish. The shark doesn't even have to chase them. Lunch is everywhere. So this leads to a whole new line of sharks with the ability to spot stationary fish. The next adaptation is a fish who developed an even more sophisticated response to threat. Randomly, again, a fish develops a new mutation. This time, whenever a shark comes near, the fish takes off at a high speed. This is now a new helpful response amongst many other fish who all freeze. This drives to new adaptations, new population changes, and you get the idea. This is adaptation and natural selection in action. But what does this tale of jawless fish teaches us humans about ourselves? Over the course of millions and millions of years, layers upon layers of adaptations were developed in all species, resulting in the diversity of life we see on Earth today. Our brains have also been built up in these levels. We are the result of reptiles becoming mammals and mammals becoming humans. We all have 3 distinct brains within our brain. I will distract you from the fish and brain with computers for a moment. These days we all use them. A long time ago it was an achievement of gigantic proportions just to get a computer to run on. And these days we all take this for granted. There is a little pre-brained thing called bias in every computer which listens for the on button when we think the whole system is asleep. Otherwise, how would it know that I'm pressing the button? A part of it has to be awake all times. This is like the original reptile brain still in us. It's very small, very simple and kind of on-off in its functions. It's not sophisticated. It won't do much other than turn you on and off, like putting you into a deep freeze if you are overwhelmed by great threat. Once this computer is awake, it runs an operating system. This might be Windows or Linux. It's simply the software that makes the computer ready for us to use for our tasks. This layer is more like our mammal brain. It's pretty sophisticated. It gives us many complex ways to respond to stimuli of all kinds. But it doesn't really have a language. It gives us urges, like instincts or emotions, but there are no plans to get stuff done. To get the computer to do anything useful, I have to load a program. Finally, with the help of this sophisticated program, I can finally use my computer to do something I want to get done. I can now solve problems and complete tasks. This is like our human brain. It has complex functions and complex connections. It tries to find interpretations, meaning and use from all the other signals which come to it from all of other brains and all our senses. Our human brains make things happen. It puts together cause and effect in this world and then takes action to change the effect to something I want to cause. It allows me to wrestle some control from the otherwise seemingly rather random world that the mammal and the reptile live in. The human brain can override nature, and now it seems to sit above it, making things the way we want them to be. But just as a computer doesn't work without a BIOS or an operating system, I can't do any of this sophisticated stuff without all 3 of my brains. Everything is connected. If I can't turn on my computer, I can't use it to write. If my operating system doesn't recognize my computer monitor, I can't see what I am doing on it. No matter how sophisticated my intended use is, these basics have to be functioning for me to do anything complicated at all. And so do it with us humans. Unfortunately, this is also where the problems start for humans. We've now become so complex that the older software we are running in our reptile and mammal brains is in conflict with the layers and layers of new upgrades on top of it. Everyone knows what this feels like on a computer. You buy it and it works just great. Then years later, after all the installs and updates, it barely turns on in less than 5 minutes. Somehow the whole thing just clogs up under the weight of all that added functionality. So you give up and buy a new one. And everything starts all over again. Your problem is that you are that computer thousands of years later. And you can't just get a new one. Our complex societal rules were born out of exactly the same process and for all the same reasons as the very first jawless fish stopped in its tracks at shark feeding time. The layers of adaptation just got more and more complicated. This is how we end up with very sophisticated scenarios. We created a new response to threat called the social engagement system. It's an odd response to threat because it looks like being very friendly, sometimes with the very people who threaten us. But it bonds people together for the exact same reason fish freeze or run. It gives them a competitive advantage in staying alive. So, human interactions is, in fact, highest functioning level of response to threat, and it's where we as humans, ideally, would want to be spending our time. It means we are keeping ourselves as safe as possible, and that feels great. These kinds of responses to thread are extremely complex and sophisticated because telling a joke at a party to attempt to endear yourself to a bunch of strangers is very different to running for your life or fighting to the death. It requires the mind and body to work in a new way. There are studies that even prove that human anatomy even grew new pathways in its nervous system to do this. It turns out that each of our possible responses to thread is the legacy of a different layer of evolution. And that's why they each belong to different parts of the brain, which, itself, was built up in different layers during evolution. The reptile runs the freeze response. This is basic, a kind of on-off response. The mammals runs the fight or flight response, which requires to evaluate whether a fight can be won or not. The humans run the social engagement response. It makes friends, builds alliances, greets people, gains influence. The human connects. You can, and you should, do all three. But in what order? Obviously, since the top layers were built last, under social influence of the modern age, they are easier to access. Think about your brain as a stack of pancakes. Your mind will always start with the last, top layer and will go down the stack of pancakes if each sequential response to thread is not enough to solve the problem. Basically, we are going back in time. If things don't work this way, we go more and more basic. Our different brains provide us with a stack of different responses for different situations. But what if the software glitches? And things get out of sequence? Or our three brains start fighting with each other and can't agree on what to do and when? When life feels easy, the sky is clear and everything is good, regardless of whether you are chatting, fighting or freezing, it's probably because your three brains are lining up correctly. They all agree on what to do and you just flow. It feels organic and natural to be you and to do what you do. But what's going on when things are not running perfectly smoothly? This is how we end up with a generation of women who on the surface level are convinced that they should strive to be independent, that career is the path to happiness, that they shouldn't trust a man, but their mammal's brain just wants to surrender to bigger authority, to be protected, to be leaded, to be taken care for. Yet at the same time we live in a post-marital society, where relationships and marriages don't last and women see themselves more and more forced to go against their nature being independent from a man, which makes them not respecting him, going against their maternal instincts by convincing themselves they should postpone motherhood until it's too late, or having babies but dropping them to strangers as soon as they are born, in order to keep their job. We now know reactivity builds up in our nervous system if we have not finished reacting to a previous threat. Overreacting is actually just time traveling, you are reacting late to something else. This creates a distorted relationship with our environment and our behavior. Just as we can overreact, we can underreact. The trickiest thing is to respond just right. Not too much, but not too little. The overreaction is the unfinished business in your nervous system. It's the frozen activation stored in your nervous system, not yet discharged. The intricate dance between our reactions and our nervous system underpins much of our daily experience, serving as a testament to our deeply ingrained emotional nature. Despite this, humans are not solely governed by their emotions. Instead, our journey often centers around the pursuit of balance and understanding, striving to become more reasonable and composed. This quest to transcend our immediate emotional responses and cultivate a rational mindset defines much of our progress as individuals and as a species. As Seneca told us in his moral letters to Lucius, man is a rational being. Therefore his good reaches its perfection if he fulfills that for which he was born. And what does reason demand him? The easiest thing, to live according to one's own nature. But universal insanity makes it difficult, we push each other to vice. End of quote. So person is not born rational, but emotional. Emotions are the primary reason, they are related to our survival, not to the reason of civilization and morality. And to become reasonable, a man must be educated, and this must happen in the parent-child hierarchy. In order to create such a hierarchy, the child must be accustomed to it from birth. But the child is usually given the role of the leader, subordinating the interests of all adults in the family to his interests. Who is given food first in nature? To the strong one, which means to the main one. And in the family, who is dressed and fed first? The child. Of course, this is a creature that knows only its natural, innate instincts and naturally concludes that it is the main thing. He is feared, his wishes are fulfilled in the first place. It turns out that the child is the most important, therefore stronger than all other family members. The child should learn from early on, and the earlier, the better, who depends on whom and who is actually the head of the family, who is its leader. Then he will not experience such stress when his parents vote him certain responsibilities, expect him to do things and demand that these things be fulfilled. It's not uncommon for grown-up children, who are used to always getting the best, to not understand why their parents suddenly start to rebel and don't fulfill all their wishes and whims, and even more, their parents demand them to do something in return. But what does it really mean to make the child a reasonable being? We need to clarify what we mean by reason. To return to Seneca's words, reason from the point of view of nature is to live in accord with our biological program. And what is reason from the point of view of society and modern civilization? Is it the knowledge of what is good and what is bad, what is allowed to be done and what should not be done, that mom is more important than the child and he should listen to her? If so, then the child is absolutely unreasonable. And if we accept as reasonable the following thought process, I will do whatever I want and I don't care about some do's and don'ts, because I am the main one, then the child is absolutely reasonable, because through him speaks the law of nature, according to whom the one who receives everything and who prevails over others is the strongest, and therefore he is the leader. This type of intelligence emerges from the instinct to survive. You have to be in charge, to overpower, to dominate, no matter what. And this type of reason is innate in human nature. A particularly difficult moment for adolescent children, not yet physically nor mentally developed, is that they begin to consider themselves adults. The escalation of conflicts appears precisely in the so-called transitional age, which always occurs suddenly and unexpectedly. And a signal for children that they have already grown up is the appearance of sexual desire. Here again the logic of our mammalian brain, or the reason of the nature, is running the show. Because in nature, if a creature is able to continue the genus, it has effectively grown. And in human society, according to our rules, norms and regulations, an individual can be considered an adult only if he is capable of taking care of himself. But there is no possibility, and sometimes no desire, to support himself. Because the drive to work is not specially nurtured. Parents mistakenly believe that this desire will appear alone with time. But in reality only sexual attraction arrives alone. The young adult's desire to work must have been cultivated and nourished by his parents. But to consider yourself an adult just because ready for sex is natural and pleasant. And let the parents take care of the material security. In this aspect, the aspect where I am comfortable with the role assigned, I will continue to consider myself a child, as long as it is convenient for me. Parents who themselves raise in their children the thought that they are too beautiful and talented to do any kind of work, push themselves into such a situation, when the responsibility of their child not being able to arrange his life and take care of himself will fall upon them. Many parents purposefully elevate their children's self-esteem, because one can be proud of a talented child. Even his disobedience can be attributed to his genius. Such a child may not be educated at all. After all, by educating a genius, you are only spoiling him. But even if the child is really talented, treating him as a genius in advance and declaring him as such is a big mistake. The final verdict and assessment of his abilities can only be pronounced by life. If entering life he cannot earn with his talent, then no one, including his parents, will no longer consider him gifted. And there are many such disappointed parents. It is much better to think of our child as quite ordinary, like most children. And with that, we prepare ourselves for the thought that he will have to work, and possibly a non-prestigious job. Only under such conditions can parents have the desire to educate their children and prepare them for life. So, my friends, we are getting closer and closer to the end of our conversation. We observed the evolution of the human brain, its different layers, how these interact and communicate with each other, and how its different layers in the course of evolution put us in conflict with ourselves. We have also seen what reason means from the point of view of nature, where cold efficiency rules. We have seen what the meaning of reasoning is, as it was in the reptilian phase of human brain development, and we have also seen how the meaning of this concept has changed with social stratification, accumulation, and the need for human adaptation in modern times and modern society. We have seen how children, left to themselves, without making the constant effort to turn them into reasonable beings through education and discipline, follow the reason of nature, based on a much more primitive logic of instincts, since it is more easily accessible in the layers of your mind and requires much less effort, because it is much closer, more intrinsic and in tune with our natural instincts, physiology, biology and anatomy. In any case, my mission with this video was not to exhaust a topic as vast as the topic of the evolution of the human brain undoubtedly is, but simply to bring you a step closer to a better understanding of yourself, open your perspective and give you directions to think about, igniting your curiosity about the topic. I hope I have been able to enrich your knowledge and understanding of how our mind works, and that you now feel one step closer to knowing yourself and the world around you and obtaining certain answers about some contradictions on a personal level, which you undoubtedly have had and observed at some point in your life, since our instincts, which are millions of years old, push us in one direction and it is impossible to silence or ignore them. But at the same time we have to look for this complicated balance between them and modern society, to whose laws we also have to conform and adapt if we want to survive. If you have accompanied me until this moment, I would like to thank you for sharing your time with me. I hope that the information I have provided you with this video was useful to you. I would appreciate it if you supported the channel by subscribing, liking and leaving a comment. If these types of topics and content are interesting to you, you can obtain more information of this type on the channel. I'll wait for you in the next video.